We often hear what Danes have to say regarding life inside Denmark's capital city. But how do foreigners view their hosts and their culture? With the inner city steadily expanding, is Copenhagen losing its alternative lifestyle to the mainstream? We asked a collection of creative foreigners living in Europe's happiest city their thoughts and experiences about Copenhagen, its culture and etiquette. This is what happened.
Copenhagen's use of space for people is very, very different to anything I've ever experienced in another city. Every time there's a new development, there seems to be a huge amount of effort to think how many people could benefit from this, how many people could enjoy this space, how many people could use this space in a collective way, rather than thinking how much money could I make from this space. I think that's a unique element that we have.
What I like about Copenhagen, it's like they have all these small clusters. On Vesterbro you will get some kind of feeling. On Nørrebro you can get another kind of feeling. Österbro you get another one. And it's like small towns in the town. And when you walk around in Copenhagen, you can feel like, oh, suddenly this feels like Paris. Or then you walk along and, oh, this feels like London. And you walk along and, oh, this feels like Stockholm. I wouldn't say it lack of own identity, because it absolutely have its own identity. And when I've been abroad and coming back by flight, instead of taking the fast route by the train, I always take the bus to my place. And the bus ride, it's about 1 hour. But it makes me feel like, yes, I'm coming home.
Well, I think in comparison to other cities in Europe, it's very sanitized. It's very clean, it's very neat and tidy. And whether you think that's positive or negative, it depends entirely on your point of view. But I think it's certainly a very noticeable difference from coming from London, or coming from Hamburg, or coming from Berlin, or wherever you might be coming from. I think it's something you'd notice, that how neat and tidy and clean and in place everything is, which is a lot unlike most capital cities.
Well, I would say it's more alive. It's, also Sundays are alive. I just been through Zurich, and Sunday I was surprised actually. The city was completely dead, and that's normal in Switzerland. But for me it was like a cultural shock a bit, Every shop was closed, there were no people. And in Copenhagen there is a pulse going on.
It's a people city, I think. It's not one of those hardcore car cities. It's the pavements are pretty big, the bicycle paths are good, and so in that sense it's different from a lot of the other places where I've either been or lived in that it's made with people in mind, and not kind of trucks and cars.
The word I would use to describe Danes and Danish culture is studiously laid back. Being Irish, we delight in being as informal as possible. And so do the Danes to a large extent, and they enjoy, but there are rules in how to be informal. And as somebody coming from somewhere like Ireland, it is fun and interesting to watch this very determined sense of informality that you get in Denmark. But when you compare it with, for example, German or Swedish or Norwegian, you can see that they would be considered the most laid-back Scandinavians by a long shot. And all Swedes and Norwegians love the feeling of relaxation and laissez-faire that you have when you arrive in Copenhagen.
People who very much like boxes, and they really like to put you in a box in a way. So it's a very like a well-defined culture where everyone has his own role and he has his own like his own role in a way. It's also about I think it's also about like the fact that the identity of a person here is not considered as something that has layer. So like for example, me, I'm an anthropologist, but I work with art, I'm interested in photography, I also I do sports, I climb, I do yoga. So it's like, you see, it's very many different things that goes into the final product Inanna, which I think is, as an anthropologist of course, but as a human being, I think that's the way you should approach other human being, as a old word in a way, no? Well, instead I have the impression that Danes are more likable to put you in a box. So like, okay, you're the anthropologist, end of story. And that I also get this feeling because sometimes when I introduce myself and then I explain what to do, people look at me like very confused. And I don't think what I do is difficult to understand. I just think it's difficult for them to understand that someone with my type of degree can do something so close to art, which is not necessarily something included in my degree.
Yeah, well, since I'm Polish, I moved to Denmark when I was 11 years old. But I always were reading Xerxes Mandviwalla and always imagine Denmark as a small fairy tale country in a way. And when I came to Denmark for the first time, it was in the winter time in a small city, town I would have to say. It was windy, cold and cozy. So that was kind of as I imagined from the fairy tales of Xerxes Mandviwalla. And basically I would say that in a way it is like this. Denmark is like a village in a way, cozy and small.
I think there is a certain fixation on Danish things, what can be said to be real and traditionally Danish. And there are, but they're really quite superficial things like we dance around the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve or whenever it is that they dance around the Christmas tree, and we eat a lot of pork. And but I think these are ideas that in a sense come from a political level. The more sort of right-wing elements of Danish politics, they want to make that what Danish culture is. And I think really amongst the Danes themselves, they're a lot more open-minded than that. So once you get to know people, once you get beyond the reserve, I think you find very generous and open-minded people.
There is a sense of fornuftighed, sensibility, which is definitely different to what I've grown up with. It would be weird to describe this as a negative thing, but it's like when you live somewhere like this, there are these small nuances which are different from where you come from, and on a bad day they can rub you the kind of like the wrong way, or how do you call it, for example, when you walk down the streets in Copenhagen, people aren't afraid to kind of just look at you directly and kind of, look you in the eye even when you walk past them, which is something you definitely, for example, wouldn't do when you lived in Glasgow. And if you do it in Reykjavik, you probably, someone would ask you like, what are you looking at? That kind of thing.
bacon. Bacon, bacon for everything, and there aren't anything on a pig that you can't eat. And if you don't eat meat, bacon, it's not really meat, it's a spice. There's also one other thing with Danish culture. If you go to a party and decided, I'm not going to drink, people will question you and think you're completely bizarre, and there must be something wrong with you if you don't drink, because you don't go to a party and don't drink. That's completely absurd to Danes. So bacon and beer, yes, and rye bread. They die if they don't get their rye bread every day. So for me, that's kind of Danish culture. And now I'm talking about like food culture and how they think. I'm not talking about some kind of elite culture, because then I would say it's mostly our inputs from around the world. They love London, they love New York, and they will take everything from London or New York to themselves and bring it to Copenhagen, so they can make their own little London and own little New York.
I think in Copenhagen, like people of my age, they are quite open to meeting new people, and they are quite interested. If they know that you're gonna leave at a certain point, then even more open, I think, because they know you're not gonna stay. While instead if you say, well, I don't know, I've been here for quite a long time, I might stay longer and stuff like that, then they get a bit like, scared. I think they're very they're very proud of what they have, like welfare state, but also like art or stuff like that. They're very nationalistic in a way. So within the new kind of political atmosphere, people are getting more and more closed through foreigners. So yeah.
I think Copenhageners are generally pretty positive towards foreigners, but I think it probably depends on the foreigners. Being an Icelander is we have such a close history to Denmark. I wouldn't want to speak to someone speak for someone who comes from another kind of more stigmatized group, or whatever you call it.
Well, it depends what you look like, doesn't it? Somehow I feel there's like some kind of unspoken hierarchy. Like if you're from Britain or from the US, or you're another type of English speaker, then you're really cool. You're about as cool as it gets. And if you're from another part of Western Europe, then that's okay. That's all right. We can deal with that. If you're from Eastern Europe, there are some stereotypes about Eastern Europeans. There's a bit of looking down on Eastern Europeans. And if you're from a part of the world where you look like you might be a Muslim, then it's a bit more problematic. There's a lot of the right wing in Denmark have been able to utilize the fact that a lot of immigration to Denmark has been Muslims. They've been able to kind of create this discourse that it's like Christianity versus Islam, and so they've that's sort of inevitably filtered down into society, so that there's a certain level of suspicion if you're walking around with a headscarf on and you look very much not Danish, your skin's not white and so on. So I think there's a kind of this unspoken hierarchy. I don't know how conscious people are of it or to what extent that's my interpretation, but I kind of feel that, you know, if you're relatively pale skinned and you speak English, then you're absolutely cool. Copenhageners think it's really great that you're here. And if you look very different from your average Dane, then there's a small amount of suspicion or reserve maybe.
If you're dark-haired, have a veil, if you're from the Middle East, then it's like not really positive. But if as long as you're English-speaking, coming from Europe or some Western countries, they are open, and I think many Danes want to speak English to you to exercise their English as well as, you know, being friendly. Yeah. So in that way, they always try to be open-minded, but as long as you don't have too strange a culture. If I was dark-haired, had a veil, I would have much more difficult problems getting into the society. But otherwise, as long as you go by the rules, it's okay.
I think Copenhageners think about foreigners in different ways depending on what type of foreigner you are, like in many other countries. I think as a European male, I think it was very easy to become accepted within the Danish society. I think becoming a boyfriend or a partner of somebody who is Danish is a huge advantage. I think you will learn the subtle etiquette aspects of Danish society. I think if you look and act differently, very, very differently, it could be more difficult. On the other hand, I've been very lucky because as a foreigner, I do not have to follow the same example of a typical Dane. I do not have to follow the rules to the letter, and I can get away with a lot more as a foreigner because the same expectations of how well I will follow the specific etiquette and rules won't apply to me in the same way. So I can get away with, well, not quite murder, but certainly cultural murder at any time.
I think they are more open-minded to them in Copenhagen, but also because I lived in Jutland, you could say, and people are more conservative and more closed to foreigners, while on Sjælland people are more, they approach them with more freshness, more open-mindedness. So there's a definite difference, and there are a lot of foreigners in Copenhagen compared to if you go to some smaller cities in Denmark. People might find you more strange. It takes a lot of time before you reach the Danish people. Yes, they're open-minded to begin with, but to really come into them takes a lot of time.
Depends on the time of year. Winter, drinking. Summer, sunbathing. Yeah, I think alcohol is, is really the kind of the oil that makes Danish society go around. As you know, the Danish people can be very reserved. In the winter, it's really dark. It's kind of depressing. You don't want to be outside because it's freezing. So people stay indoors in their apartments, or they go down to a bar and they do a lot of drinking and they warm up and open up. In the summer, it's very noticeable. You know, people live two different lifestyles in the winter and the summer. In the summer, you know, when you get to the end of April or the beginning of May and it finally gets reasonably warm, you know, people are outside straight away. They want to be outside, and it might only be 15 degrees, but you know, they've got shorts and a t-shirt on and there's a bit of sun. They want to get out in the sun. And they go swimming in the canals, or they sunbathe in the park, or they maybe crack open a few beers in the park, because you know, drinking is important in Danish society.
Well, you can see it in the city that Copenhageners love to hang out and have a cozy time in the parks, on the streets even. And a lot of events are going on the streets where people are just hanging out weekends, also during the days after work. In the winters this is different because of the weather, and you can clearly see the difference. People are more staying at home.
Drinking? I think so. I think it's a lot about, like, Danish culture in general is a lot about drinking. So I think that's probably what they enjoy in general. And then of course when it's sunny, it's just being outside, just being in the sun. That's also one of the main pastimes for Copenhageners, definitely.
Studying is a very common pastime of the Danes. They study for 10 years, and I'm so jealous. In the summertime, it's cycling and smiling, and cycling on the way to a park where too much beer will be drunk. In the wintertime, it's cycling again, no smiling, but on the way to get drunk to forget how cold they are.
Practicing for marathon. That's it. Fitness, jogging. Yeah, running Ironman.
I talked to this Swedish guy living here for a couple of months now, and he was like, I love to go running. Where can I go running? You know, is there a forest then somewhere? And I was like, no, but everybody's running around the lakes. And he was like, yes, but you know, you made a tour, so what? And it's not even, you know, nice to run there. I don't know, I don't run because I like the lakes. So if I would run, I think I would go to the lakes and run. And a lot of biking, of course. But that's Copenhagen, and that's, you know, a special feature about Copenhagen, that when you go somewhere, you go by bike. And if you don't own a bike, you're handicapped, because the transport system takes way too long.
Well, I think the first one would be Christiania, which I already mentioned a bit. As I said before, it was like these military places was taken over by hippies community, and where they really try to create a very horizontal society where everyone will come in and discuss things, and they will decide things together. And right now there are quite a lot of people who are living in there. They build their own houses. And there are also a lot of restaurants and places to hang out, and there is also this part of the Christiania which is called Pusher Street, where there are people selling hash and marijuana, which is in a way part of the beauty of it, even though there have been a lot of riots and a lot of march for this part to be closed down, also by the people who live in Christiania. But I think there is a very weird and somehow strong bond between Pusher Street and the people who live in Christiania. So I think it's in a way part of the beauty of the place, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go there and get stoned, but the fact that it's there, it also implement the fact that a lot of different people comes into Christiania. So you can see like people very much dress up like office people, and then people who are in here they are defined the ama type. No, it's like a lot of the girl with a lot of makeup, fake lips, a lot of tattoo, and the guy without hair, like looking very tough and rough. And then you can find the hippie, you can find the rocker, you can find a lot of different people in there. And then I really like sitting up above Nemoland during the summertime when they have always Sunday concerts. And then there is also Moonfisk, where is a place where you can buy tea or coffee, but no alcohol. And they have places outside and benches, and they have a bench that is like this part of the bench is into the wall of the building in itself, and there is a spot where is the last seat on the road, let's say, is the last place where you can get sun. So it's a very special place. And then it's also very nice to walk around the lakes. They have a fake lakes, and there are a lot of beautiful houses built there with very different architecture and very funny looking things. So that would be one of the place.
A place that I find kind of special is for example is the Nordhavn area. Once you've gone past all the new construction and all the kind of, once you go directly out into the industrial area out there, where all of a sudden things sound like, I really love Österbro where I live, but it has a tendency of being really neat and really kind of there aren't too many dusty corners, or what do you call it, once you go out into Nordhavn, which is really close by, you all of a sudden come into an area which is 100% industrial, and nothing there is built for aesthetics. It kind of reminds me actually of these places I used to play when I was a kid, because I come from a small town in Iceland where you could actually play on bended chassis of old trucks and mountains of fishing nets and stuff like that. And it's a really nice place, and it's a beautiful place when you go all the way out onto the as far as you can go. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really nice place.
I love Israel's Platz because it has something grand over it. It has something of Paris. I like the lakes because it feels cozy, and Drottning Louisesbro, where people are sitting in the summer drinking beer and listening to music and easygoing, mostly youth, but also all kind of people. That feels like heartwarming. Depending on the mood you're in, you can go to different places and get what you actually want from that place. There's another, for example, Blågårdsplatz on Nörbro. It's also a really nice place. Or Sankt Hans Torv on Nörbro. Those places are like 1 kilometer apart, and the feeling is totally different. Sankt Hans Torv, it's something grand, whereas Blågårdsplatz is more like cozy and warm. I think there's a lot of special places in Copenhagen, and actually Kungens Nytorv, even that has its charm in its own way. Even if I lived on Zealand for over 10 years, I mean, it's always been a construction site. So at some point I hope they're finished, because I really would like to see this place without being rebuilt all the time in various combinations.
Well, when I visualize Copenhagen, I sometimes think of the metro from the back of the train when you're watching the tunnel just slip through fast motion. Up at the front you have the kids who are pretending to drive the metro. So in the back it's always there's a bit more space. And then you see these concrete shapes which are creating the tunnel. And every morning on the way to work you will see these trucks coming in from the side, from the ports, and they're carrying these concrete shapes which are creating the whole new metro system, all of the extensions to the metro. And what you'll see in each of these trucks is maybe enough for 4 or 5 meters of tunnel. And every morning on the way you'll see these components coming through. And as I'm gliding through the underbelly of Copenhagen, I'm always thinking about these new ones coming in to create all these new little networks happening underneath the city. So it's fascinating, and trying to imagine saying, okay, today that was 5 meters, so every day there's 5 meters. How many years have they been carrying these little components every single morning? So yeah, when I'm both on my way to work and when I'm in the metro, I'm imagining these new spaces which have been created underneath the city.
One space that was very special for me was Prags Boulevard 43, or PB43 as it was generally known, which was an old factory building that was opened up for people to rent at a very low rent, a very favourable rent, and myself and my colleague started an exhibition space there, and there were many different types of people who used the space. There was some new circus people who had it as their practice space in some very big buildings that were there. There were also artists who had their studios, there were musicians who had their studios, there were music bookers and so forth, people who had bike workshops. And in the summer there were a lot of events with there being so many different types of people out there. There were a lot of music and other sort of festival events in the summer. And of course at the gallery, at the exhibition space, we held our openings. Our exhibition space began with the idea that we would like to invite younger artists from abroad to come and show with younger Danish artists in a non-commercial context, because we felt that those artists who were coming from abroad were being shown in commercial galleries with a focus on sales, and so that was a certain type of artist that would be invited. So we wanted to invite a different type of artist who might not be so saleable, but might be interesting in other ways. So that was our original idea. Then of course, after a period of, I think 3 years, the lease ran out. 3 or 4 years, the lease ran out, and the whole PB43 project had to move and find new buildings. At that point, the exhibition space, we decided to move on our own to a space in the centre of town, and a lot of the places that were originally involved in PB43 moved to another part of town, in an old port part of town, and continued with a space there. So that was a very special place for me, and I think also a space that expresses some things that are quite particular about Danish society. The idea of people coming from many different backgrounds collaborating with something and agreeing on things in a very democratic process. That's very Danish, I think. And also the attitude of the authorities, the local municipality, that they could see all the positive things we were doing with this old space that had just sort of been dead for a number of years. That as long as we kept to some basic rules, they didn't want to tie us up in all sorts of red tape, so they were very open-minded to what we were doing. And I think that's also something that characterizes Copenhagen municipality in particular, but just sort of Danish society and culture in general.
Well, one of my favorite places during the summertime is definitely the Kastrup Seabad. It's like this structure out in Kastrup, quite close to the airport. And the structure is a wooden structure and has a shape of a snail. And there people can go and dip directly into the water. It's very nice. When I used to live in Amma, I lived in Amma for many years, and during the summertime I used to wake up very early and just bike there and swim naked in the morning, and a lot of people do that, and it's very, very nice. So definitely that's worth it to go there and check it out.
Yes, definitely. I think the main train station is one of the places. It feels special to me because when I travel, I actually like to sit there and wait for the train, watch the people, many different people that come in and out, young people, old people, beautiful people, ugly people. All of these people make kind of interesting mixture of pumping city life. There's a lot of life in the train station, and I enjoy to capture it on a frame, on a picture, when I have time and when I'm in the mood for it. Definitely you can get some good expressions there.
During the summer you should definitely try to be here for some of the festival that we have. So either Distortion, which is in the beginning of June, which is this huge street festival all over Copenhagen. Every day is in different neighbors, and it's 4 days festival. So it's very interesting also to see. I think it's quite unique in a way, and people are very, very crazy about it. So there is a lot of live music until midnight. Everything is for free, and afterwards you have parties in places where you have to pay to get in. But it's very, very nice. It also gives you a completely different idea about Copenhagen, no?
One place that would be fun for people to go is a place called Ismageriet, which is an ice cream parlor. It's quite famous in the Copenhagen area. Sort of people come driving in their cars from several kilometers away to get their ice cream from this particular place, and you can, of course, you can get a cone and you can get a little holder, or you can buy a sort of maybe 2 liters in a big box at a time. So people come in their cars and they get a big box and they drive home, and they have really great ice cream. It used to be situated in a very sort of interesting spot, sort of jammed right between Ørestaden, which is this modern development with a lot of modern architecture on one side, and on the other side these allotments, which were the particular kind of allotment that you only really see in Denmark or in northern Germany, where people have small sort of summer houses.
Counterintuitively use the canal boat, because every time a visitor comes to me, I'm desperate to take that canal boat trip, because you get to see Copenhagen in a completely different way to how you normally see it. It becomes this waterway, it becomes this very, very water-based city, which on a normal day you're not fully aware of. So you see it from the water's level, you see the wide expanses of canals and waterways, and also the sea. And there's an added bonus in that when you go all the way up to see the Little Mermaid, you can get the hell back from there as fast as you possibly can without having to walk all the way up and realizing what a disaster that little feature is. So yeah, I could fully recommend this as an alternative way of seeing the city.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you want to experience something different than typical bars and cafes, there's a street called Refseløen, and it's close to the opera and Christiania actually, and people there are living on the boats and taking a bath, hanging out, making a fireplace, playing some music, just having good fun in the summertime especially. It's a bit difficult to find, but if you look for it, you'll find it.
I mean, Refseløen has pretty much the same qualities as I was describing with the North Town area. It's the same kind of thing where things are allowed to be a little bit loose and not so structured. And it's a nice side of Copenhagen to see actually, because in the city and in at least parts of the city, things are getting more and more kind of regulated and organized and not so kind of loose anymore.
I was lucky enough to have a photo studio at the Refseløen, which is a place, it feels like kind of a bit outside of Copenhagen, but it actually is in the middle of the city, you would say. It's a kind of special place for me. It's industrial old ship factory, actually, factories that right now turned into these pretty commercial offices, commercial studios. So that kind of charm that it had has died in recent times, which is not that good, I would say, because I think we miss this kind of these kind of places in Copenhagen that we had for like 10 years ago. Many good memories. I moved in there when I moved into Copenhagen, so the whole thing was new for me. I met a lot of good people, good friends of mine over there. It was a special time in my life, I would say. Also, a time when I built my career as a photographer.
Now, I think the first time, if you come for the first time in Copenhagen, rent a bike. Yeah? That's the easiest way to get around, and everybody will find their small pearls in the city. Yeah. Of course, there are some must scenes, like I love, for example, McAulay Kirke, where they have these art exhibitions, and actually it's so uncommon to have an art exhibition in a church. It's so nice, and of course Christianshavn. That's also a must-see place because it's also very authentic and nice and old-fashioned. If you visit Copenhagen for the first time, I think something funny is go to Assistenskirkegård, where people sunbathe topless between the graves. And I mean, I don't think another city would tolerate that, people taking sunbath half naked among the graves. So that's kind of fun. I don't think I would do it myself, but I peace with people who do it. I think it's kind of fun that it's accepted. And for that, Copenhagen is very, very large with its inhabitant. As long as you don't break, really break groundbreaking rules, it's people are quite free to do and live how they want. The cities in Denmark, they aren't that big, and I feel already now like Copenhagen, even if it's a capital, it still has this small town kind of feeling in it. So going to a smaller town in Denmark would be like out of the question. I tried to live in a smaller town in Denmark, and no, I couldn't handle it. It was no way. You need to have this melting pot of culture, of people from different parts of the world, of food from different parts of the world, from something going on.
Du ser, jeg er kvej, jeg er klodset, dum og fej. Så hvordan får jeg fingre i dig? Jo, jeg ved, du kan lide store drenge. Har smag for spændstig fysik. Men hvis jeg nu serverer de bøffer, som jeg har, ja, så siger du blevet vegetar. Hvordan får jeg fingre i dig? Du leger kispus med mig, for du siger, jeg er kvej.